So, all right. So should we just start, tell you about my spinal stimulator experience, Joe?
Sure.
Okay. So I had been suffering with chronic pain for about 7 years and all the traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, all the typical pain management things that they had used. I had had cortisone injections. I had had nerve ablations. And whatever it would only give me relief for at most like 3 months. And so that's when my doctor had gotten trained in how to install various different spinal cord stimulators. So she said to me, you know what, why don't we try a trial? And the company that they happened to be working with at the time was St. Jude, which then got bought out by Abbott. And the issue with me was that instead of just having pain typically when I sit down, I started to have pain in what I call like my creases. So like when I sit up, it's kind of like the area right at my waistline. And my doctor was explaining that, it was hard to tell whether it was hip joint pain or if it was sacroiliac. So I went ahead and I was really scared to do the trial until I found your videos on YouTube, which talked about what to expect during a spinal cord stimulator. And then from that, I then decided to join a Facebook group, and I saw you in the Facebook group. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to be an informed consumer. Let me think about it. So I did the spinal cord stimulator trial, and that I had it last 5 days. And I really wish I had it last 7. And the reason why I say that is because I went ahead with getting the spinal cord stimulator surgery in July, and I found that they have not been able to replicate the results that I got during the trial with what's actually happening now. Now, I will say my spinal cord stimulator is very helpful in terms of relieving my pain where I sit. But I've been through about 10 or 15 different programs now, and we're still struggling to get me some type of pain kind of in, the creases of my body, kind of like at my waistline. And like you, I have to alternate between sitting up and laying down. So I find that like the best thing is if I can sit up for like 4 or 5 hours at a time and then lay down for a couple and go back and forth. Yep. Now, during my trial, I didn't have any pain in, my waistline or my hip area. But I did definitely have pain still in my SI joint. And so what I realized now was I think a good part of what I was experiencing was the placebo effect. The first 2 days, it definitely hurt. It hurt in the trial as if I had an SI joint injection. Mm-hmm. And then once that pain started to relieve, I didn't have pains in my hip. But when I woke up from having the surgery, the very first thing I said to the rep was, I still have pain in my hips. And July 16th will be a year since I've had it. And I've been chasing that for the last year about trying to get some kind of relief. And
now, let me interrupt a second. I've got a quick question because that does happen. I don't have a statistic, but I know some people, have different results with the permanent than they do with the trial. Yeah. Did you get paddles when you got your trial?
Yeah. No. I just had the leads.
Or I mean, when you got the nobody generally gets paddles for the trial.
Right. Well, I think in Europe you might.
Yeah, there's a few exceptions that prove the rule. Well, there's some where they basically do the trial on the table. If they get it in the right area, they go full implant right then and there.
And and the issue was that, I went to a couple different neurosurgeons to just see what their bedside manner was. And my first experience with the neurosurgeon was the guy was the biggest egomaniac I ever wanted to meet. And after meeting him, my husband said, and he never says anything, he's like, that doctor was a real dick. And it was the second doctor who I was referred to. So then they referred me to another doctor, and he had a wonderful bedside manner, but he was only trained in how to do the paddles. And knowing what I know now, because the recovery time was really intense and there was a lot more pain than I've ever experienced in my life, I would have held out and waited to try and find somebody who did the lead wires only. Because whether you get the paddle done or you get the lead wire done, my understanding is that they sew both of them into place so they won't, slip out.
Yeah,
And,
they're both anchored by different methods. And,
right.
and like I tell people, and I had a woman really get insistent with me, but the way it was explained to me, and I try to be pretty up to snuff on what they tell me, is the paddle is attached to the vertebra. So they
Right.
remove a small piece of bone through a process called a laminectomy,
Yes.
and then they attach it. And it seems like from the research I've done, different manufacturers have different little methods and different anchors they use. But that's in effect. So then it's attached to the bone, and then you have your spinal cord. Now, my percutaneous leads were slipped into the epidural space, and this woman was lecturing me on how it couldn't be clamped to my spinal cord. But in fact, it is, because what they told me is it's like, if you've ever seen what an O-ring looks like, or like a bull ring for a bull's nose.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Where it goes around a pipe and holds a couple wires in place, so to speak. They told me it's something, they said it's kind of like a big staple, but it's made out of silicone, and it actually attaches to the dura that surrounds the spinal cord, which puts them in closer proximity, but I also think it makes it a little less positional. I hear that a lot, because instead of being attached to the bone and the spinal cord's moving in relation to the bone for a variety of reasons, it kind of rides with it.
Yes.
Now, whether or not that, I don't know that I can back that up with any kind of hard data, but when you deal with as many people as I do with the spinal cord stimulators, you start to feel and see patterns.
Yes.
Amongst and common complaints. Yeah. So with that said, I have yet to find a study that really had a significant statistical difference for the leads staying in place, whether it's a paddle lead or a percutaneous lead, after they're healed in place. And if you don't follow the protocols, you can pull a paddle loose. I've talked to dozens of people who have had it done. Is it less likely? It might be, but here's the thing. Unlike when I had my cervical fusion, 2 or 3 days after, you'll push the limit to see, like, whoa, that's too far. I don't want to turn that far, because that's where it hurts. With these leads, if you push it to the point that it's uncomfortable, it may be too late.
Yeah.
I know. So we literally have a member on the Spinal Cord Stimulator Success Stories group who bent over at the waist without thinking about it at about the 12-week mark to pick up a dime. Didn't think a second of it, and popped a paddle. Yeah. So, now different situations may lend themselves to different configurations and paddles versus percutaneous leads or whatever. I mean, that's up to you and your doctor. But I know in my case, they gave me like a clamshell brace to wear for 12 weeks.
That's and I didn't have to wear that, but from, what I'm reading, regardless if you have the paddle or if you have the percutaneous leads, both of them now involve a partial laminectomy so that they can sew them in.
Right.
So, I mean, it's my understanding that during the trial, they don't sew them in, or older technology. Now, and a lot of people, when they're going to have the surgery, they are so desperate for relief. And I was in that, group that you're almost willing to try anything. And so I didn't research it well enough, which is unlike me, since I'm a researcher for a living. And, now that I look at it, multiple, scientific articles have all stated that you can expect a 50% reduction in your pain. In my case, I'm not having a 50% reduction. I'm probably having more like a 25%. But when I get that 25% reduction, it's life-changing.
Right. It's still a big deal.
It's still a big deal, and so it's great for people who are able to not need medication, and I support that. So that's another piece of information I learned. And I can't say I regret having the surgery done. I will say that at 3 months, I didn't get relief until 3 months. And the other thing that happened was that we still don't know if it was due to having a nerve ablation or having a bad unit. They're still trying to analyze it. But I went and had a radio ablation frequency, and I turned my stimulator off. And when I got home, it wouldn't turn on, and it turned out that it fried the unit. So if you had, and I spoke with my pain management doctor, and she said she had never had that happen to her. She said that there were issues that she should have received a phone call from the reps saying, this person's coming in for the nerve ablation. Make sure you tell them to put it into the protective mode. So now I had the surgery, replaced. I had the unit replaced, and it was no big deal. Honestly, it was probably less painful than a radio frequency ablation.
Yeah.
It must have been about 9. I had it done in at the 8 months after having it initially done. So if I had to do it over again, I don't think I would go with Abbott. And the reason I say that is because the big thing about Abbott is that they claim they have the burst mode where you're not supposed to feel it. And what I have found is that the burst mode is actually painful for me because I have to turn it up enough so I feel that tingling. And that tingling is honestly, to me, it feels like sparks flying down your nerves. Whereas if I'm in the tonic mode, it works much better. And the only reason I went with Abbott was because of this versus going with Boston Scientific, and Medtronic wasn't even offered as an option, is that, I was told, you won't even feel it. So based on the fact that I tend to get more of my relief in more of my relief in this tonic mode, I would have
low frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I would have gone with a different type of technology, because the thing about the Abbott is all the adjustments need to be made by your rep. They can't be made by you. And my doctor actually told me that she has several clients who have different modes of spinal cord stimulators that do their own programming themselves. So I don't know, the only thing I can really manipulate is I have it set up so that I can kind of control the strength of it in terms of, it's a very basic, plus minus, and I can, and I had it done so that I can adjust the right and the left independently. But I didn't even know that was an option until I happened to be set up with this one specific rep who had a background in biomedical engineering. And the other reps I'd been with had a background in business. And I'll say that makes a big difference. You want to make sure that you get a rep who has some type of medical background or engineering background.
Or at least science geek.
Exactly. And so now, out of the 5 different folks who have possibly could be, sent to me, 3 of them have medical backgrounds. And so I only let 2 people work with me directly. So, that's kind of pretty much my spinal cord stimulator, experience. I still say it's a positive experience because it has gotten me some pain relief. Would I do it again? I'm not sure, especially since the second time I had the battery, the whole unit replaced, I had to pay $3,600 for it out of pocket. So, and that's something to think about. So,
well, at least I'm encouraged because, as you said, you got your new battery now. How long ago?
I had it done on March 23rd.
Yeah.
And so I've had it now for almost 2 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you still got room to get it dialed in, better yet, probably in time. I can't believe that they can't ungate, so to speak, your area of effect and stuff. I had not heard that about that particular company.
Yep.
But because I know on mine, and I really hate to name drop because I really believe that it's Ford and Chevy, and people always go, well, I said, look, there's still 5 or 6 main car manufacturers. Obviously, what's best is a subjective thing,
right?
Or there wouldn't be 5 or 6 major car manufacturers.
But there's
still
not that much between, let's say, I'm trying to think of there's not a lot of variation, let's say, between Buick and Oldsmobile, which are used to be 2 GM manufacturers.
Right, and exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. So,
and it depends on your situation. The analogy I used the other day is if you're buying a car and you go to 3 different places, one might have power windows, one might have power locks, and one might have rear window defrost, and those are all great things, and they're all swell, and once you got them, you want them, but the car will still get you where you need to go, whether it's got any of those or at all. And then, of course, it depends on your situation. If you live here in Las Vegas, I have no need of a rear window defrost.
Exactly.
We never have frost.
Whereas,
period.
So you can't buy a car without that.
Right, exactly. Whereas, maybe the power locks doesn't matter to you but your AC doesn't work, so you need those power windows.
Yeah.
Everybody's situation is different.
Yep.
And if you're taking 6 kids to school, you need a minivan.
Exactly.
The car's not even in the market.
Yep.
So everybody's situation is different.
Yes.
And that's where I think really getting a doctor that you trust, and it's tough because they've got such limited time. And I always tell people how these are so complicated, and it's not like any other surgery. It really is a process, and I hammer on that over and over because people need to go into that, and that's why I started with the videos about it, because people need to go into it knowing what to expect. Because I talk to people who are ready to have it pulled in 3 months, and if you're not going to give it more than 3 months, you might as well not even start. You might as well not even give it a shot, because in 3 months you're not going to be anywhere near the ability of the thing.
Here's another thing you need to keep in mind too. So when mine died, I said, forget it. I'm not going to have it replaced. And then the tech explained to me that because I have this implanted, if it's not tied, if the unit is not tied to my specific leads, and I won't be able to put it into, like, say, either surgical mode, which is protected mode, or MRI mode, and therefore I can't get a bunch of stuff done. Nobody's going to let me get into
if you can't show them that it's in safe mode.
Right. So then I mentioned to the Abbott tech, well, maybe I think I should go with Medtronic, and she explained that, and this is where you get into kind of, the different proprietary stuff. If you have Abbott leads, they'll work fine with Boston Scientific, but they won't work with Medtronic. So I would have had to gone in and had
a whole complete
pulled out, or the panels pulled out and then put back in. And, I was like, there's no way in hell I'm going through another laminectomy. I'm at a point now where, unless it's life-threatening, I'm not having another surgical procedure where they knock you out, and, you're in true stuff. So, if I had to do it over again, I would have insisted on a 7-day trial instead of a 4 or 5-day trial. I definitely would have done, more research, looking around. And I would not get what I currently have, the Abbott one, because of the fact that, all of these little tinkering around stuff, you have to rely on the tech to do it. And
the tech doesn't even know what it feels like. And that's where I don't like to fault the techs. Now, some of them don't seem to know much about what they're doing. But I'm sure they're
Yes.
cranking out techs as fast as they can. Okay, so I'm not trying to be ill-willed towards the tech, but here's the thing. It's basically, now the tech hears from the not customer, what's the term I'm looking for? The patient.
Representative, are you thinking of?
The rep who comes and does your stuff, your tech, talks
Right.
to the patients.
Right.
And the patients are describing a sensation and a movement and an effect that he has or she has no frame of reference for. They've never had
Yes.
a trial. They
Yep.
don't understand what it feels like. And then they're trying to talk based on what this patient told them to the next patient. And so it's like a blind person who's been told what color looks like by a sighted person trying to explain
Yes.
color to another blind person. Okay, because they have no way to even imagine. Come on, a vibration, that's the best they can do? That it feels like a vibration? I can make it feel anything from like I got a kitten purring on my back to I remember they used to have these like barrel-shaped chairs that you could sit in at the mall and they'd vibrate the shit out of your feet.
Yes, it's like feeling like you're being electrocuted, or
right.
Yeah.
I can turn it way up like that, or I can turn it down to the size of a cat. And I always tell people I run mine about the size of a 45 record. If you're old,
Yeah,
it's
I know
not
what a
a
45
dessert
record
plate,
is,
a
yeah.
CD, somewhere in that area in the small of my back feels like a house cat's laying there purring.
Yeah.
And I also tell people that when you first feel it, it's an indescribable feeling because you've never felt anything like it. So it can be jarring, and I also find when my programmer is changing stuff on their remote or their unit, there's a lag from them changing something to when it takes effect.
Yep.
Okay? So when they're going, stop me when you feel it, and they're rolling it up, they're 3 clicks past where you feel it by the time you feel it.
And
you see what I'm saying? So
I
now
have to say, my reps
it's so intense.
are really good about not doing that.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people initially feel that, and it's so foreign, and they're like, oh, I don't want that. I mean, you and I see it all the time in the groups. There's people that have made up their mind they don't want the tingle or the vibration or the whatever before they've ever felt it. Their mind's made up.
Yeah.
And I tell people, first of all, high frequency doesn't fit every situation. You're one of those cases, and there's science for that. As you increase the frequency, you narrow the bandwidth. That's just a matter of science. So you're trying to hit the pain with a narrower bullet, if you will. That's a matter of physics. I'm not picking on any brand. So the higher you crank your frequency, the more focused it is, which also that generally means the further something goes. That's great if you're trying to get a cell phone signal into an apartment building that's made out of metal. You want a lot of, a narrow bandwidth. You want to really pound it in there. Now, if you're affecting somebody's spinal cord that's 15 millimeters across on the average spinal canal, you don't need laser focus necessarily. And what are you hitting behind that? Because overstimulation tends to be a common problem with people with high frequency. And I'm not picking on it. Everything's got its downside. There's no best. That's the thing. It's all trade-offs. So,
and the other thing too is when again, if I had to do it over again, wouldn't necessarily go with Abbott because of the fact that I don't have control over the issue. You have a lot more control in Medtronic. I don't have adaptive stimulation. However, I finally saw my original tech who had been out on medical leave, and she's a nurse. And she actually is now making adaptive programming for me so that when I'm laying down, I can use a certain series of programs, and when I'm sitting up, I use another. The other thing
That's one thing I really like about my Medtronic, and like I said, I don't usually name drop, but it's nice for things like if you roll over in bed, your stimulation doesn't change and wake you up.
Yep. And
which is nice.
The other thing is, I almost need 2 programs running at the same time because I have, basically when I'm sitting down, I've got that sciatic burning, but then I also have, when I'm sitting up, that pain kind of radiating down from my hips, going inside of my legs. a lot of the times people are so desperate that they'll virtually try anything. And I think there's, just like we had predatory loan practices with students taking out loans for college, I'm thinking that we have somewhat predatory, practices on medical devices, because people with chronic pain, especially in the last couple of years, one, we had this draconian, thing from the CDC, which says you can't exceed 90 medical equivalents of morphine. We had that thing going on. We had the opiate crisis. And so a lot of it made the perfect storm. So people were desperate. It would be very interesting to watch, And I think, and the other thing I would say is, don't stress about having the battery replaced. It really isn't a big deal. Most people pretty much have it done on a Friday and they go back to work on the following Tuesday. So unlike, my experience with the spinal cord stimulator was that, first 3 days, I was on the highest amount of pain medication I've ever taken. By day 7, I actually felt somewhat normal, but it took me like another 2 weeks to get my endurance back. So, if I had to do it again, I think a longer trial, a different product, and a lot more research on my part. And that's what, I guess I'd tell people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if you can get relief from a TENS unit, I would not even begin to think about having one of these installed if a TENS unit is working for you.
Yeah.
I don't really think there's much comparison because they work so differently, other than they're both electric. Where one's affecting the spinal cord and one's going through the surface tissues.
And you see, I'm one of these people who gets approximately about the same amount.
Yeah.
So, for instance, right now my spinal cord stimulator is not working in the pain that radiates from my hip down the, inside my groin area. So when that gets really bad, I will use my spinal cord I'll use my TENS unit. Now,
Yes.
This past week has been really tough because it's been raining on and off for the last 10 days. And I literally feel the pain. It's like somebody's clamping a vice down on my joints when we've got a storm coming in. And I know you can relate to that.
Yeah. I know.
My other question is your pain really specifically focused in one area, Joe, or does it go out quite a bit?
It's out quite a bit, and it runs down both legs.
Yep.
I was done originally. We were seeking as much for the nerve pain as to relieve my SI joints.
Yes, so that's
okay. So they went in and pretty much nuked, scorched earth the area. So I've got two 8-point leads, and it's kind of like a church window, peaked at the top, and the 2 leads come down, and he's got them spaced perfectly. So there's like 4 million combinations, and it's like when Star Trek, when they're trying to detect an invisible ship, and they get a bunch of ships, and they beam, some beam from ship to ship, and when there's a break in the beam, they know there's something passing through there. And Data's the only one that can figure out that there's echolocation, of all these geniuses on the ship. It's the android that figures it out. But yeah, so they can create this web of neurons across my spinal cord, and I'm going to have to do an episode about how these things work anyway soon, so I might as well talk about it a little bit here. Basically, whether you've got a paddle and all your leads are in one area and they're all shooting out, or if you've got a setup like mine where they're creating a web, depending on what effect they're trying to create. Okay, so now as the pain signal's coming up my spinal cord, it's got to pass between these leads. If we can get electronic interference in its path, bink, knocks it off its rails, and I don't feel the pain. Okay, great, sounds good. Simplified version of it, but not everybody's condition lends themselves to that segment. Maybe you only need 4 contacts in a real focused area. Yep. I mean, if you look on my Facebook group, Spinal Cord Stimulator Success Stories, I got a picture of about 8 different types of leads because there's different situations. with that said, the let's see, I was talking about my perk leads and
I was asking about where it was on you. If it was
oh
in a
yeah,
specific
is
area.
what they did for me is they sought to give me what they referred to as the full pantyhose effect. So I'm able
Okay.
to literally affect everything from my bottom rib all the way around to the soles
Yes.
of my feet.
And you see, and sometimes what I have to do to get enough relief when I'm having a really bad pain day is I have to dial it up enough so it's in my ribs, and that's really disconcerting for me.
Right.
You know, so
And that's usually because it's hitting your diaphragm. And usually for that, if you can have them reduce the amperage, which is the area of effect setting, so to speak,
that's a good point.
because that carries because it's getting too far up into
Yes.
the diaphragm. And it's a lot like a stitch when you run.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you
Yeah,
mean. It's like when you're
it
running and
gets a
you
hold of that
get
nerve. That's
yep.
and yeah, when you catch a stitch in your side running, it feels very much like that. And usually that's often an amperage thing
Yeah.
because if they can get it so it's not affecting so much of an area, they want to just get it so it's affecting the area it needs to affect. You don't want to be affecting your bladder or your colon or your kidneys or
And I was going to say, and the other thing too, I don't know very much about is, mine runs from T12, my thoracic 12, all the way down to I think it's my sacral joints 1 and 2.
Okay.
And so again, I think they're very good for people who do have very specific pain. They have it done within the first 2 years of having pain.
That definitely helps your
Yes.
outcome, and I think that's also because the recovery becomes so much tougher if
Yes.
you go through the atrophy of being disabled for years. It's
Well,
really tough to come back, and a lot of people aren't prepared
yes.
for the rehab that's involved after the fact.
And now this is another thing. They didn't prescribe any kind of rehab. So that's another thing. Like ideally, I think that it should be a whole wellness process where, your pain management doctor also they're in this building with all these different professionals, including, because you have to have a psychological evaluation done. You have to have all these other things done. And what's happening is, this is what happens when you kind of have a point of service plan, in terms of, pay for fee. You get all of these isolated people, and you really need them talking to each other. And I
Right.
mean, that's more. Joe, can we stop the record button?
Sure.
Thanks.
Let me stop it.